The moment Captain Sterling Faust walked through the front door of Clover Ridge Animal Hospital with that German shepherd on a 4-foot lead, every person in the waiting room shifted in their seat. The dog's name was Jaeger. According to the file Lottie had pulled up at the front desk, K9 unit retired from active duty 8 months prior, currently assigned to Captain Faust as a personal companion animal through the Veterans Affairs Adoption Program. 87 pounds, 4 years old. German shepherd, sable coat with a scar running in a thin white line from his left ear to the base of his jaw. Darby Cahill recognized that scar before she recognized anything else. She was standing behind the front desk, reviewing the afternoon intake list when Faust came through the door, and the moment she looked up and saw that scar, she felt something drop out of the floor beneath her. Her clipboard didn't move, her face didn't move, but inside, everything shifted at once. She knew that dog. She kept her eyes on the clipboard and said nothing. Faust didn't sit down. He stood near the center of the waiting room with his shoulders squared and his feet apart. The way men who'd spent too long in positions of authority learned to stand, as if they were always on the verge of being called to the front of the room. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped dark hair and the kind of jaw that had probably gotten him out of more than a few tight situations. He wore civilian clothes, dark jeans, a quarter-zip pullover, but he wore them the way men in the military always wore civilian clothes, like a costume that didn't quite fit. Jaeger stood at his left side, motionless, head slightly lowered. Not relaxed, alert. An older woman in the waiting room, there with a tabby cat in a carrier, made the mistake of leaning toward the dog and saying, "Oh, what a beautiful boy." Faust's hand came up fast, "Don't." The woman pulled back, blinking. "He's a working dog," Faust said, "not a pet. Don't touch him, don't approach him, don't make eye contact." He said it without irritation, just the flat, practiced certainty of a man who'd given the same warning so many times it had stopped feeling like a warning and started feeling like a fact. "He'll go for your hand." The woman looked down at her cat carrier and said nothing. Lottie, at the front desk, gave Darby a wide-eyed look over the top of her monitor. Darby kept her expression neutral and walked to the intake window. "Captain Faust." He turned, looked her over, the scrubs, the stethoscope, the name badge, whatever conclusion he drew from that took approximately half a second. "Yeah. I'm Darby Cahill. I'll be taking Jaeger's initial vitals today before Dr. Oberg comes in. If you can follow me back." "You?" Something shifted in Faust's face. Not quite a smirk, but close enough. "They send a tech to handle a military dog?" Darby held the door open. "That's how intake works, yes." He walked past her without another word. Jaeger walked with him, smooth and synchronized, not pulling on the lead. But as the dog crossed the threshold into the hallway, something happened. Something so small that anyone who wasn't watching for it would have missed it entirely. Jaeger's nose turned. He scented the air. Then he looked directly at Darby. She kept walking. Exam room 2 was small. A steel table in the center, cabinets along the far wall, a single exam light overhead. Faust brought Jaeger in and stood against the wall. The dog stood at his feet, head low, scanning the room with his eyes. "He's been off," Faust said. "Sleeping too much, not eating right. VA doc thinks it's anxiety from the transition. I think that's a garbage diagnosis." "When did you adopt him?" 6 weeks ago. He came out of the K9 unit at Camp Lejeune. Apparently, his previous handler rotated out. They couldn't reassign him to active duty, so he went into the adoption program. He said it the way people talk about things they didn't choose. "I put in the request because I've worked with dogs before. Figured it would be straightforward." "Has it been?" Faust glanced at her. "No." Darby set her clipboard on the counter and crouched down to Jaeger's level, not reaching for him, not making a sound. Just crouching, head slightly tilted, weight settled back on her heels. "Don't," Faust started. Jaeger moved. Not aggressively. Not the way Faust's hand shot out, expecting it. The dog simply took 3 steps toward Darby and stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could have touched him without extending her arm, and he stood there looking at her face. The room went very quiet. "I told you not to approach him," Faust said. but the certainty had drained slightly from his voice. I didn't approach him, Darby said. He came to me. She didn't reach out. She just stayed still, let the dog read her, let him take whatever time he needed. Jaeger's nose moved in small, careful increments, working the air around her face, her collar, the inside of her wrist. Then he sat down. Faust stared. That doesn't usually happen, he said. I know, Darby said. She meant it in a way he couldn't understand yet. She got through the intake examination without incident. Jaeger stood still for the thermometer, the weight check, the visual inspection of his coat and joints and ears. He didn't pull away when she checked the scar along his jaw, just turned his face slightly into her palm, the way he always had when she did that, back when doing that was part of her morning routine. She kept her breathing even. She kept her face professional. She noted everything in the chart. Faust watched her with a different quality of attention than he'd had at the front desk. The mild condescension had receded. In its place was something she recognized as the discomfort of a man who didn't have an explanation for something he was witnessing. "Did they tell you anything about his history?" she asked, without looking up from the chart. "Before he came to you." Basic file. Handler transfer deployment in 2022 through 2024. Counter-narcotics work in Afghanistan. Standard K-9 service record. He paused. Previous handler's name was redacted. Privacy stuff, apparently. Darby wrote something in the chart. "What kind of training does he respond to?" she asked. "He doesn't always respond. That's the problem." Faust's voice had a controlled edge to it, the frustration of someone who was good at most things and found one thing that didn't yield to effort. "I've worked with trained dogs before. With him, it's inconsistent. Sometimes he follows commands fine. Sometimes it's like he's looking for something he can't find, and the commands don't even register." Darby finished writing and set the pen down. "Can I try something?" Faust watched her. "Sure." She looked at Jaeger, not at Faust, not at the chart. She looked directly at the dog and said quietly, in a tone that was neither a command nor a question, but something between them, "Platz." The German word for down. Jaeger dropped. Not slowly, the way a dog lowers itself when it's uncertain. Fast, clean, both front legs extending forward simultaneously, the way a dog drops when it has been trained by someone who drilled that command into muscle memory over months of repetition. The way she had drilled it. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Faust said, "What did you just?" "He was trained on German commands," Darby said. "Whoever handled him before you would have used German. That's why he's been inconsistent. He understands English, but German is what he was conditioned to from the beginning. When you give commands in English, there's a processing gap. It probably looks like disobedience, but it's more like translation." Faust was quiet. He was looking at the dog lying flat on the floor between them, and he was looking at it with an expression that Darby couldn't quite name, somewhere between realization and something older, something closer to embarrassment. "The VA handler never mentioned that," he said. "They probably didn't know, or it wasn't in the file." She looked down at Jaeger. "Here," she said, "come." Jaeger stood, crossed the 3 feet between them, and pressed the side of his head against her thigh. She let herself rest her hand, just briefly, against the top of his head. "He was trained by someone who loved him," she said. "That's not something you can retrain out. It's not something that transfers automatically either. It has to be rebuilt." Faust didn't answer. Dr. Oberg came in 10 minutes later, reviewed Darby's notes, conducted the full examination, and found nothing physically wrong. Jaeger was slightly underweight, mildly dehydrated, with some tension in his hindquarters, consistent with a dog under chronic low-grade stress. Dr. Oberg suggested dietary adjustments, a structured routine, and reconditioning exercises. He handed Faust a printed sheet and shook his hand and left. Faust stood in the exam room with the printout in one hand and Jaeger's lead in the other and didn't move toward the door. Darby was finishing her notes at the counter. "You knew the commands," he said. "Lots of people who work with working dogs learn some German commands," she said. "It's not uncommon." "That's not what I mean." His voice was measured, not aggressive. Careful, in the way of someone who had decided to be careful. You knew that dog. The way he reacted to you. That wasn't a dog meeting a stranger who happened to know a German command. That was something else. Darby set the pen down. She had known this was coming. She'd had approximately 45 minutes to decide what she was going to say when it did, and she still wasn't entirely certain. She turned around. His call sign was Jaeger 7, she said. He was certified in narcotics detection and patrol apprehension. He deployed to Kandahar province in October of 2022. His handler fed him by hand at every meal because he'd come out of a kennel environment and had food anxiety. He likes the base of his tail scratched more than anywhere else. He will not sleep facing a wall, and when he gets nervous, he chews the inside of his left cheek. Faust had gone very still. He was my dog, Darby said. For 2 years he was my dog. She had been a military police officer. That wasn't something she advertised at Clover Ridge Animal Hospital, mostly because it didn't come up, and partly because the years she'd spent in uniform felt like they belonged to a version of herself that had been folded away and stored somewhere she didn't open often. She'd been good at the work. She knew that without ego. She'd been good at it the way some people are good at languages or at reading rooms, something that came from the inside rather than being learned. She'd been assigned to K9 operations in 2021 and partnered with Jaeger 8 months into her deployment when his previous handler had taken shrapnel and been evacuated stateside. They'd worked together for 22 months. She'd been medically separated from service 14 months ago, following an injury that had nothing to do with Jaeger and everything to do with a vehicle accident during convoy movement that had taken 3 vertebrae in her lower spine and about 30 degrees of rotation from her right shoulder. She'd spent 4 months in physical rehabilitation, and at the end of it she had a discharge date, a disability rating, and a referral to vocational counseling. Jaeger had gone back into the K9 unit pool. She had not fought that. You didn't fight it. The dog belonged to the military, not to you. You understood that going in. Everyone understood that going in. Understanding something and feeling it were different things, and she'd spent the first 6 weeks back in the States, feeling the difference between them in a way she didn't particularly want to examine. She'd found the vet tech position through a job board. It wasn't what she'd planned. She'd vaguely thought about continuing her education, nursing school maybe, something that used the medical knowledge she'd accumulated in the field. But the vet tech job was open, and the clinic was 4 miles from where she was staying, and she was good with animals, always had been, and it paid enough to cover her apartment and her groceries and the occasional physical therapy copay. She'd been there 11 months when Jaeger walked through the door. Faust sat down on the corner of the exam table. She hadn't expected that. Men like him rarely sat. "Why didn't you say something when we came in?" he asked. "Because I didn't know what the right thing was to say," she said, "and I didn't want to make it about me." "It's not about you," he said. "It's about him." He looked at the dog, who was still sitting at Darby's feet with the quiet steadiness he'd always had, the quality she'd come to think of as his essential self, watchful and still like a held breath. "He's been wrong since I got him. I thought it was something I was doing, or not doing. I've worked through the training protocols, I've adjusted the environment, I've had 3 consultations with the VA's animal behavior specialist." He exhaled. Nothing changed. He was looking for a scent he recognized, Darby said quietly. "Dogs don't reason through loss the way people do. They just keep checking, keep scanning, until something matches." Faust looked at her. "Is that what you were doing?" he asked. "When you got this job?" It was a sharper question than she'd expected from him. She considered not answering it. "I work with animals," she said. "I'm good at it, that's all." He didn't push it. She gave him credit for that. Lottie was waiting in the hallway when Darby came out to finish the paperwork. She had the expression of someone who had been watching through the window of the door and was trying very hard not to look like she had. "Everything okay in there?" "Fine," Darby said. "Straightforward intake." He seemed, Lottie searched for the word, intense. "He's a veteran," Darby said. "He's doing his best." She pulled the file from the rack and started filling in the checkout notes. Through the closed door of room 2, she could hear Faust's voice, low and even. talking to Jaeger, not giving commands, just talking. She'd done that too, at the beginning, when Jaeger was new to her and didn't know her voice. Just talked to him, narrated whatever she was doing, let him learn her cadence. Her sergeant had caught her once and given her a look, and she'd told him that the dog needed to learn her voice before he could trust her commands, which was true, but wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was that it helped her too. She finished the checkout notes and slid the file into the completed rack. Faust came out of the room with Jaeger and settled the bill without much conversation. He took the printed care sheet and the dietary recommendation and folded both precisely and put them in his back pocket. He clipped Jaeger's lead to his collar. At the door, he stopped. "Would you be willing to meet with him again?" he asked. "Professionally, I'd pay for however many appointments it takes." Darby looked at the dog. Jaeger was watching her. "I'm a vet tech," she said, "not a trainer. You know his command language. You know his history." He paused. "You know him." She thought about the 4 months of rehabilitation, the drive to this clinic every morning, the 11 months of filling out intake charts and giving nail trims and administering vaccines and going home every night to an apartment that was quiet in a way she was still learning to live inside of. She thought about the morning routine she'd had for 22 months, the by-hand feeding, the command drills, the way Jaeger would press the top of his head against her shin exactly once every morning before they began, which she'd eventually understood was his equivalent of a handshake, a daily reaffirmation that they were still them. 3 sessions, she said. Sundays, morning hours before we open. I'm not charging you for them. Faust looked at her steadily. Why not? Because they're not really for you, she said. He nodded once, slowly, like a man accepting something he hadn't earned and knew it. 3 Sundays. The first one, Jaeger didn't leave Darby's side for 2 hours straight. Faust stood back with his arms folded and watched while she moved through the command set, plats and sits and here and blibe and fuss. Watched the dog execute each one with precision. Watched the tension in Jaeger's hindquarters begin to release, degree by degree, the way a held fist opens. The second Sunday, she started handing Faust the commands, giving him the German pronunciation, giving him the hand signals. Jaeger looked between them each time. Not suspicious, just calibrating, the way dogs do when they are deciding whether to extend an existing trust to someone new. At the end of the second session, Faust gave the Platz command himself, and Jaeger dropped clean. Faust looked down at the dog, and the muscles in his jaw moved in a way that wasn't a smile exactly, but was something close to it, something private. Darby wrote it in her own private ledger. The third Sunday was lighter. She brought 2 tennis balls, which was not regulation for a working dog, and she didn't care. Faust threw one, and Jaeger ran for it with the uncomplicated joy of a dog who had remembered somewhere along the way that he was also allowed to be a dog. He brought the ball back to Darby first. Then he turned and carried it to Faust. Faust took it from his mouth, looked at it for a moment, and then looked across the yard at Darby. "Thank you," he said. She nodded. "He's going to be okay," she said. "He just needed someone to build the bridge." Faust looked down at Jaeger. And what about the person who built it? It wasn't the kind of question she'd expected from him. She had revised her understanding of Captain Sterling Faust over 3 Sundays in ways that complicated the initial picture considerably. He was not as unreachable as he'd seemed, and the arrogance she'd read in him at the front desk had turned out to be mostly armor, the kind of armor that fits so well after enough years that you forget you're wearing it. "I'll be all right," she said. Jaeger walked back to her and sat down against her left leg, the way he used to during a rest period in the field, and she felt the weight of him there like a familiar counterbalance, like something returning to where it belonged. She put her hand on his head. It had been 14 months. She had missed him every single day of them. "Yeah," she said, quieter than before. "I'll be all right." The next Monday morning, Lottie was standing at the front desk with a look on her face that suggested something had happened. "There was a call this morning," Lottie said, before opening. "Left a voicemail." "Who?" Lottie spun the handset toward her and hit play. Captain Sterling Faust's voice, brief and slightly awkward in the way of men who were uncertain whether they were doing the correct thing. This is Faust, for Darby Cahill. I wanted to let you know Jager ate the full bowl this morning, both meals. He slept the whole night through. First time since I got him. A pause, just long enough to hear him decide something. I thought you'd want to know. That's all. The message ended. Lottie looked at Darby with wide eyes. Who is that? Darby took the handset, saved the message, set it back down. A veteran, she said, and his dog. She went into the back room to start the morning intake list, and for the first time in 14 months, the quiet of the clinic didn't feel like something missing. It felt like something she had been building toward, slowly, one Sunday at a time, from the inside out. The way dogs rebuild trust, and the way people do too, when they finally stop waiting for the scent of what was lost and let themselves be found by something still here. Outside, the first patients of the morning were already arriving at the door. She went out to meet them.